It was a busy day, of course, on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. Dr. Bernanke testifying on that very controversial issue, and that was the Bank of America purchase of Merrill, Lynch, and did the Federal Reserve. Did other authorities at the very top of the U.S. financial system exert powers beyond their mandate? Rejoining us from the Rotunda once again, very kindly staying with us, is Representative Paul Kanjorski, Democrat, Congressman from the state of Pennsylvania. Congressman Kanjorski, Mr. Bernanke is up for renewal, obviously. His future sort of up in the air. Will he be reappointed? Would you support another term for Dr. Bernanke, or do you think that maybe now is a prime opportunity, a sweet spot for some new blood and some new way of thinking at the Federal Reserve?
Well, first and foremost, that's an appointment of the President of the United States, so I wouldn't want to get involved in any of those machinations. But from my own personal experience, I worked with Dr. Bernanke, particularly through this crisis, starting back in September 18th of 08 until now. And I've been positively impressed with his ability to concentrate, to handle many complex issues for long periods of time. Has he made some mistakes, or has the agency that he's the chief of made mistakes? Sure, but we've all made mistakes. Everybody does make mistakes. I think he's done a very commendable job. If he is reappointed, I'd have absolutely no objection to that. On the other hand, if the president wants to move on to someone new, that's his prerogative.
What's your, with the benefit of some time to have to think about it now, ever since Tim Geithner issued the plan to overhaul the regulatory framework, including enhanced powers for the Fed. Do you feel that too much power is being concentrated in the hands of the Fed? Do you think it would be more advantageous to have the oversight diffused a little more than they seem to want?
Yes. I think that we've heaped upon the Fed a great deal of responsibility and authority now. And at the hearing today, I pointed out to Dr. Bernanke that the Fed had authority to do an awful lot of rulemaking in regard to mortgages. And over 14 years, they failed to do that. And to a large extent, the subprime mortgages and the bad securitizations based on those mortgages perhaps wouldn't have happened if the Fed had taken a more proactive role in putting out regulations as to what the standards of mortgages should be in the country. So from that respect, I think the Federal Reserve stands a great deal of responsibility for what has happened. And while they have those authorities and have not fulfilled all the authority they presently have, and we've heaped additional responsibility on them with this disaster, I think it may be more important for us to find another systemic risk regulator, or to hesitate putting any more authority on the back of the Federal Reserve.
What do you think is the worst-case scenario? What is the worst kind of a scenario which you have imagined if they get this new regulatory framework through exactly the way the administration is perceiving?
Well, you know, I've over the course of years now, I've been examining regulatory agencies in the financial service industry, and I find it's not always the case, and most often not the case, that their authority to regulate is not there. It's the use of that authority or the implementation of the regulations that they make. And I think we need more oversight, both internally and externally, from regulatory authority to see that they are properly and implementing what authorities they have. And I think in other words, you can have perfect laws and perfect regulations, but if you don't have the people or the personnel that implement those rules and regulations to their fullest extent or properly, then you're not going to get a good result. And I think rather than thinking about getting the most perfect rule or regulating everything that's imaginable, let's get done well what we can get done well, and let's have mechanisms in place to test whether we're accomplishing that.
As we reported earlier in the program, one of the top stories, one of the other developments at the Fed, Congressman, was that the Federal Reserve is going to let one of their emergency programs expire and trim, pull back some of the emergency lending programs in a couple other areas as well. Is that an indication to you? Do you feel that this is the time to be doing that, maybe laying off the juice a little bit? Have we gotten over the big hump and it's just more housekeeping and maintenance than anything right now?
No, I think that it's an evolutionary process. And sometimes they're going to need work and programs in a certain area and less in others. And sometimes they're going to need more program areas to concentrate on. And that's where a flexible Federal Reserve authorizing the authority they have is a healthy attitude and not inflexibility. So I compliment the fact that they can move these programs up or down on the need basis. But I don't think we should take it as a test as to whether or not we're out of the woods yet.
Finally, Wall Street is mounting a bit of a campaign these days because, you know, anybody that walks around in a suit says they work on Wall Street if they still have a job and professes to be a banker is not the most popular guy around. And a group of them has even employed people like Hank Paulson to kind of clean up and spiff up their image a little bit. Do you think it's time for the witch hunt, if there ever was one, on Wall Street to end? I mean, has there been a little bit too much blame throwing in this case? Do you think maybe it's gone, the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction?
Well, I don't know that whether it has swung too far or not. All I can say is that with all the blame we've talked about in this interview on the Federal Reserve or the government or some of the institutions, to a large extent, one of the areas a great deal of blame belongs is how securitized mortgages were sold over the last 4 or 5 years in Wall Street. And most of those mortgages weren't part of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These were put together and packaged on Wall Street with an extra tinge of